Resident Evil 7 has been out for a few weeks now. People have had a lot of time to play it and get an experience out of it. For me, it was very interesting. I've never really been the biggest fan of first-person horror. I was able to be invested with PT or Cry of Fear, but not something more extensive like Outlast or Amnesia. I asked myself, why? Why would I be excited about Silent Hills and Resident Evil 7, but not be more invested with Amnesia or Penumbra? I found the reason was because I feel you can do horror two different ways. You can have pure horror, where you're defenseless and can only hide or run, but on the flip side, there's also the action horror genre, where you can defend yourself but risk becoming overpowered to the point where you'll be so well armed that you can't really die. In the middle of that, there's survival horror, which I feel is the perfect balance of the two. It has all the great elements of horror, but it gives you the chance to either defend yourself and get out, or you can go out with a bang, and at least feel like you had some sort of chance before you suffer a horrible death. But what does this have to do with Resident Evil? Well, let me explain. When you think of survival horror, the two games that come to mind tend to be either Resident Evil or Silent Hill, but the first of the two franchises to be created was Resident Evil. In March of 1996, Resident Evil was released on the Sony PlayStation. The graphics, sound design, and gameplay at the time were something completely new and revolutionary. People everywhere were shitting themselves in fear when this game came out, be it because of the horrifying monsters, the difficult controls, or the fact that the music evoked such a strong atmosphere throughout the environment that you were completely absorbed in the world. I mean, come on. Remember the mansion basement music? No, not that. The one that's not an abomination. Yes, that one. Resident Evil pioneered the survival horror genre, giving you the horrible feeling of being pursued and chased throughout a maze of a mansion with living corpses trying to kill you, as well as zombie dogs, crows, a giant snake, and some weird amalgam of cells developed in a hidden underground lab run by a company so deep-rooted, convoluted, and secretive that they'd be the NSA's wet dream. The creators of the game could have just made a game in the vein of Clock Tower where the only things you can do are hide or run, but instead they thought of a different idea. What if you could defend yourself? Like, with a gun. The creators of the game decided to give you options and means of defending yourself, and the way they kept the fear going is to give you very finite resources. Every bullet you use better be for a good reason, because you don't know when you'll get more ammunition, and the enemies can take up to half of a magazine to kill. You better save that first aid spray for when you're on the brink of death, because if you waste it, you may as well spread your ass cheeks for the zombies and other wonderful things wanting to get a quick bite. And you better not ever waste a save, because if you run out of ink ribbons, then oh boy son, you are fucked harder than Sasha Grey, Lisa Ann, and Alexis Texas combined. The way they made the original RE was amazing to say the least. Even looking back on it, seeing how much effort they put into it is still baffling. I mean, seriously, this game was so good that it warranted a remake. Twice. Name any other game that got a remake of the remake. Something about the way they balance so many factors to create a unique and wholesome experience is just fantastic to this day. I feel like I said enough on why and how Resident Evil revolutionized horror. The game did so much to show that you could make a game where you can be scared but also have the means to defend yourself, so you can have some sort of motivation and reason to keep going. It showed that you don't have to be defenseless and that you can make actual wholesome horror with ways to defend yourself. Because in Resident Evil, the biggest reason why it's scary is not completely due to the monsters and environment, but the way that your mind messes with you while you're playing. On your first playthrough, you don't know if the best thing to do is to kill that zombie or use that first aid spray. Yeah, you can clear out a tricky part of the mansion and guarantee yourself a safe spot, at least if you're not playing Remake, But what if you need that ammunition more later on? What if there's this huge thing that's going to happen where you'll kick yourself and say something like, "God, I wish I would have kept that ammo," or "Man, this would be so much easier if I had that herb." The best way Resident Evil makes you think was terrifying and stressful, but also fun and satisfying. I feel the most impressive part of it all was that the creators managed to stick a perfect balance with it, which is something that I feel is the most important part of any survival horror game. Around 2005, Resident Evil and Silent Hill were already cemented as the grandparents of survival horror, and were cemented as some of the most recognized and cherished series in the world of gaming, up until they started taking a turn that can't be explained as good or bad, but rather as just a major shift. In Resident Evil's case, after the release of Resident Evil 4, the series took a drastic turn. It stopped focusing solely on being a horror game and instead started hammering in a lot more action into the games. Saying that this is a bad thing is a blanket statement, because even though Resident Evil 4 had a lot more action, it still remained as a fan favorite among many. Many people still praise this game as one of the best in the series. Many people even preferring it to other entries in the series, and many people claiming it's their favorite RE title and that it's the best in the franchise. Although no matter what people think about RE4, you can't deny that it was responsible for the downfall of the series. While the game is a very solid addition to the franchise, the games that took after it started taking a turn for the worst. Capcom had seen the success that RE4 had after sales started to stagnate and decline during RE3, and decided to take the series in a whole new direction. Instead of focusing on the horror aspects of the previous games, Capcom had the creators of future installments focus on more gunplay, more action, and more ridiculous mutations. The change in direction is something that I will give Capcom credit for, because even though the changes were ultimately not welcomed, what with the negative review scores for future installments painting a grim picture for the future of the franchise, Capcom tried when implementing those changes. It just wasn't the wisest choice they could have made with the series. Regardless of intentions, the damage was done, and the Resident Evil series of games lost what had made them great, and that was the horror aspect. And with the fact that games like PT had so much potential for survival horror could never see the light of day, things were looking extremely bleak for the genre overall. Just as things were at their lowest, Resident Evil 6 taking the piss with reviews and PT being cancelled, leaving fans with broken hearts and an ever-increasing hunger for another tried-and-true survival horror game, Capcom on June of 2016 during E3 announced a newly revitalized entry in the Resident Evil franchise, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. When this announcement hit, a new glimmer of hope was created in the eyes of fans everywhere. Things were really starting to look brighter, and rightfully so. For the first time, we were about to see survival horror reborn and awaken for the new generation. We had seen it try to claw its way out of the pit that it was pushed in 10 years ago with games like The Evil Within and Alien Isolation, but now was the time that we were really starting to see a new advent in the genre. The hype of the initial E3 trailer was kept on running, with thoughtful and carefully released demos, mixed in with the events that were going on through certain locations in the US where people could go and play the kitchen demo in the newly talked about PlayStation VR, and you can see how Capcom were able to retain the hype that they generated with their E3 trailer. The countless discussions, the theories, the speculation was something that I will always remember. I remember finishing the kitchen demo during one of those public events and the beginning hour demo in my house, and I was ecstatic and excited. That glimmer of light that I had after the release of PT and the announcement of Silent Hills was back, but now with a series that I also held near and dear to my heart, maybe even more than Silent Hill. And this time, without any complications from publishers and directors, everything was set. All the cards were in play. This was going to be one of the biggest releases of not only the new year, but of the entire generation of gaming. All that was left to do was to wait for the release. On January 24th, 2017, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard was released to the general public on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. This was now the time that we as fans have been waiting for the better part of the year. After all the complications and issues with the series and the survival horror genre, now we can finally see how this highly anticipated sequel was. And to be honest, it was really good. And I feel the reviews do the game justice. It's not perfect by any means, but it is what fans of the series have been looking for a long time now. With Resident Evil 6 getting a Metascore of 60 and Resident Evil 7 getting a Metascore of 86, it's easy to see that Capcom did a lot of things right with this sequel. And after playing it, I honestly loved it. I felt it really dug back into the roots that the series used to be praised for. The atmosphere, the sound design, the controls, and everything about the game was pulled off very well. I love how in the beginning of the game you're left defenseless. The fight with Mia is insane, and the realization of how hopeless things seem is sobering to say the least. And I feel the beginning parts of the game display that very well. Even when you get the handgun, you learn that you need to time your shots well. If you don't aim for the head, these enemies are your worst nightmare. The Bakers and the Molded are fantastic in both design and execution. Every enemy has their own unique traits. The books and notes that you find throughout the house add a certain amount of charm and variety to the game. The Madhouse's resemblance to the Spencer Mansion, the convoluted puzzles, all the things that gave the first game its charm are all displayed here, and I loved it. At least up until the second half. I feel that after the second boss fight, the game loses a bit of its edge on why it was scary for me. I wasn't really getting scared or having any sort of stress after the second half. If I was surprised by an enemy or something else, instead of thinking if I should stay and fight or if I should run, I just kind of blasted their face off with a shotgun shell. And I feel stuff like that was the reason why the game lost its edge for me. The fact that I had too many weapons, having the pistol, the shotgun, the burner, the grenade launcher, and the magnum. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a variety of weapons in these games, and hell, even a large supply of ammo. But I feel you need to have an adequate amount of different enemies to kind of equate for the weapons that you have. During the part where you're going through Lucas's traps, I didn't have the same feeling that I'd been having, since there are only really 4 different types of enemies, with 3 of the 4 being very similar to each other. You have the Molded with a giant sword on its arm, and a Fat Molded. I didn't really care too much for the alternate Molded types because they didn't really introduce many things that were new. The Strong Molded just hits you harder and takes more hits to kill. The Fat Molded has something interesting with its Left 4 Dead style boomer bile, as well as the part where they explode when you kill them, but I feel that the creators could have done more with the enemies, especially for how much ammo they give you and the different kinds of powerful weapons that you get. This is what I was talking about when I was mentioning balance. RE7's weapon balance is kind of thrown off halfway throughout the game. I feel they could have made this better by changing some of the enemies, maybe give us a very strong enemy in the vein of Pyramid Head for Silent Hill or Nemesis for Resident Evil, where it follows you through parts of the Baker estate that you've already been to, similar to how Crimson Heads worked in REmake. Maybe the other enemy could have some sort of horrible backstory, similar to Lisa Trevor. I mean, for God's sake, there were several victims that the Bakers kidnapped who successfully turned into Molded. Maybe one of them could be like the Bakers and could have gone insane, thinking he was a new part of the family. Maybe he could have been the one you fight in Lucas's WWE-style cage match instead of a Fat Molded. I don't really mean to be negative about this, but I really do feel like this is a bit of a letdown for me. This also ties into how I, among others, feel the game was just a tad short. I wish that it were just a little longer, just one more act, one more major plot point with the game, and it would have been even better. However, the game was still very interesting, and I loved the rest of it, even after you fought Jack, for the last time. I love how you learned that the Bakers were actually peaceful people who were just taken under Evelyn's control. I still very much enjoyed the game, some of the flaws just stand out to me. But although the game has its flaws, it's very much a fantastic game, still great and still worthy of a playthrough. It's still the wholesome survival horror experience that we've been looking for a long time. Overall, I feel that survival horror has had a long and bumpy ride. We've had the good, the bad, and the ugly, but I feel that since Resident Evil 7, we might see a lot more of what I and many others loved from this series, and I fully welcome it. I want more RE7. I want more games like it. Going back into that guest house again made me just think of how far we've come since the fallout of PT, and how could I not think that? The same environment that fans explored and dissected in and out for the beginning hour demo, the similar look and aesthetic of the houses in beginning hour and PT, it's like the creators acknowledged it by having it be the last part you play in. The part where it all started just happened to be the same part where it all ended. And there's something about that just makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I love Resident Evil. I love survival horror. And I hope we see a lot more come from this time period. I hope the devs of RE7 can create more like it. And I hope we can see more games come out in this style. I highly suggest you get Resident Evil 7, especially if you're a fan of survival horror.